All right, great. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Orientation, Building the Board Team. We will be getting started right now. I'm Carrie Lamb, the Director of Operations, and I'm now going to hand it off to Debbie Singizer, who's our Director of Board Services at VSBA.
Thanks, Carrie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us. As Carrie said, my name is Debbie Singizer, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar. Onboarding, or new member orientation, is a timely topic, as many who are watching this webinar today are getting ready to welcome new members to their boards. It is a big topic, and we don't aim to cover it all. I do, however, want to leave you with ideas of how to do this work and give you plenty of resources so that you do not have to start from scratch. There are plenty of examples from boards around the state of Vermont, as well as in other states around the country, that are doing onboarding and doing it well. So do take advantage of these resources. One of my favorite sayings is to, quote, steal ideas shamelessly and give credit generously. So this is what our agenda is going to look like today. We're first going to do a very quick group poll to get a sense of where we all are in terms of our onboarding of new board members. And then I'll speak for just a few minutes about the framework for our discussion. And then we will talk about what onboarding looks like in practice, and that's with our panelists who are here today. And you will see that they fall along a spectrum of experience with board orientation, from just getting off the ground and started with a new program this year to others that have been doing this type of work for a long time. So chances are good that you'll be able to identify with at least one of our panelists. And after the panel, we want to leave time for your questions. As Carrie said, well, maybe she didn't say this, but we will take questions at the end after all the panelists have had a chance to speak. Please do put those questions in the Q&A box. Don't worry if your question doesn't get asked right away. We are keeping track of them, Carrie is, and we will make sure that we get to them. So here is our poll. I just wanted to take a minute to see where we all are. This is going to be the question. And you should have the poll up on your screen right now. Just take a minute to answer this question. We really want to get a sense from our viewers that are on here today where you currently are in terms of your own district's onboarding program. This is anonymous, so there won't be any attribution. So please go ahead and answer honestly. And we'll give you just about 30 more seconds to answer the question. It shouldn't be too hard.
We're at 83% answering at this point.
Perfect. Don't be shy. The last 16%, you can do it.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll.
Great. Let's see what we've got. All right. So out of those who answered, we have about 20% who answered yes, they do provide some type of onboarding for new board members. 60% is our largest answer and most popular answer, and that is yes, but not enough. Okay, that's very encouraging. This is great. There's nobody on this call that it's not doing any of it, so that's great to hear. And then a few people said that they're planning to do it this year. So that's great. I think you all are in the right place, and we're excited to get going. Did you all get a chance to see the results? Again, I can't see the poll, so I hope the results showed up. Okay, fantastic. So let's start things off with just a little bit of context. Why does new board member orientation even matter? Is it really all that important to school boards? And if it is, why? There's a saying in governance circles that goes, every time a new trustee joins the board, it's a new board. And note the term trustee is used here. It's just another term that people in school governance will sometimes use instead of school board member. Some people will say board director, and others do use the term trustee. But today we're going to use those three terms interchangeably. Now, if we were all in a room together today, I would love to facilitate a discussion about this quote, what it means, do people agree with it or not? But given our webinar format and our limited time, I really can't do that. So what I will share with you is what I think that this quote means and why I do happen to agree with it. So when I see this quote, this is how I interpret it. A new member brings with them their own personality and perspectives, their ways of viewing the world and the district. The new trustee will hopefully, in most cases, be a breath of fresh air to the board culture. Also, how a new board member or board members are brought onto the board or the governance team will, in many ways, determine how effectively that board will function from that day on. So what do I mean by that? For example, will the board have unity of purpose? Will it be a high-functioning board where everyone understands their roles and responsibilities of being a board member? Will the board be coherent and speak with one voice on the decisions that are taken in board meetings? In my mind, it's hard to over-exaggerate the importance of welcoming and onboarding a new board member. In order to become, or in some cases remain, a high-performing governance team, we must address the learning needs of our new board members and solidify our new team. In practice here in Vermont, the degree to which a school district provides new member orientation ranges considerably, and I think we just saw that from the poll. From districts that do nothing at all, although none of you fall in that category, although I imagine there's some boards that aren't on the call that do nothing at all, to a comprehensive program that will last up to a year, and everything in between. Sometimes a newly elected board member will be handed some documents, maybe the budget, the board policy manual, or maybe some board packets from earlier meetings, and be asked to read those, and that's considered their orientation. Sometimes maybe a very well-meaning but busy board chair and superintendent will set up a meeting with a new member before the first regular board meeting, and they call that orientation. I get it. We're all very busy. And I was board chair once, and in thinking back on it, that's probably how I handled the new board member orientation. After all, when you bring a new member, it requires us to slow down, to kind of take a collective pause, if you will. And all the while, the board work continues to pile up. So it's not surprising that sometimes this very important work, helping bring a new board member or board members up to speed, doesn't get done. It gets shortchanged or even overlooked because of more urgent demands. But we are all here today to offer you some hope and encouragement. And I would like to share two messages that I hope that everyone will take away today. First, there is no right or wrong way to do this work, maybe with the exception of not doing it at all. That might be the way not to do it. And there are many ways to do that this work can be done, and you will be hearing from folks about how they do it in different ways. And secondly, the second message I hope you'll walk away with is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Doing a little something is better than doing nothing at all. So what we will share with you today are ideas, lots of them, and you certainly don't need to use them all. Kind of think of it as a menu of options. And after listening to the speakers and reviewing the handouts, which will also be posted along with the recording on our website, think about what might work for your board, given its time constraints, the board size, the strengths and the interests of the current board members, and it will all be fine. So I would like to suggest something here today. I would like to suggest that we toss out this notion that orienting or onboarding a new member is something that we have to do or something that slows down our board's progress. Let's reframe it and let's think of it as something that we get to do. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for our board and by extension for our district. Onboarding a new trustee is an opportunity to accomplish 4 important things, as you see listed here on this slide. And I took this from a book, which many of you may already know or even own, called The Governance Core by Davis Campbell and Michael Fullan. It's blurry, I realize. First, it is an opportunity to begin afresh with new members or trustees, as they call board members, in addressing system-wide coherence and the district's moral imperative. Secondly, it's a chance early on to introduce a new trustee to the board's governance culture. This governance culture can be a bit complex and nuanced. It's sometimes hard to grasp. So the sooner we can help a new member become part of a unified, well-functioning board, the better off we'll be in the long run. Third, orienting a new trustee as soon as possible after they are elected or appointed around this concept of governance will make a significant impact on the effectiveness of the new trustee. Giving them the knowledge about what governance is and what it is not will help avoid pitfalls and prevent very well-meaning board members from making mistakes. And finally, it gives the board an opportunity to reinforce the focus and learning of the existing board members, especially those who are still relatively new to board service. It helps to remind them what their role and responsibilities are. So that's just a little bit of context about why new member orientation matters and why we should do it. So let's discuss now how we do this work. That's when we're going to move to our panel, our board members who are here, who have lots of experience doing this work. We're lucky to have them to talk about what their boards are doing to help welcome their members, the new members to their board. So this is how we'll be doing our panel. We're going to start with Washington Central with Ursula Stanley, and then we'll move on to Kelly and Deborah from Wyndham Southeast. And then we'll finish up with Herb and Dick from Taconic and Green. So each one of these districts will speak for maybe 5 to 10 minutes on their onboarding or new board member orientation, give you some examples of what they do or what they are planning to do this year. And on this slide, you'll see some questions that they may provide some clarity around or some answers to. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand the floor over to Ursula. Ursula, as I said, is a member of the Washington Central Unified Union School District. And we are very happy, Ursula, that you are here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I will start by saying that our board tries to do things in year-round cycles. And so when we get new members, our chair will reach out and establish some one-to-one communication. One, there's a reminder to make sure that they sign all of their school board governance paperwork that allows us to be on the board and welcomes them to the board, but also starts establishing just that one-to-one. We assign mentors. So a lot of times, Floor, who is our chair, will assign a mentor. I may have pushed in and just taken a new member once and made myself their mentor, but we try to pair them up with somebody in their town to just make it a little bit easier. We have 5 towns that we serve. And then we typically hold a new orientation meeting for new members, but we welcome all members to come, and we typically get to introduce ourselves, get to know one another, because like Debbie talked about, new people bring new ideas, new experience. And then we go through the education process of what is open meeting law, what are we allowed to do, what can't we do, the board governance of trying to stay at our appropriate level of governance, which is an overview, the balcony, sometimes we call it the fire tower view, and that we are in charge of our vision and core beliefs and hiring our superintendent. And then we have learning that happens throughout the year. So if something crops up, like we have to have student hearings, we will hold very specific student hearing education, especially if we've had new members on board who might not be familiar with it. We do year-round board learning. We meet twice a month, and our first meeting of the month is board education. And we handle some business, but for the most part, it's board education. And so last year we read a book together and had discussions about it. This year we have visited all of our elementary schools and our high school and gotten to hear about the social emotional learning techniques that they use in their schools to help us. And then we typically, during our board, I can't think of the word right now. We have a board retreat where we also do education on, we brought in one of our lawyers. They talk about Vermont open meeting laws and things, they'll give us sticky situations, but we also encourage everybody to use the Vermont School Board Association new member webinars, and the toolbox is there. We hand out the essential work. It's going to be flipped, isn't it? And the Vermont Education Law book. And so not everybody on the board gets the new one every time it's put out. But when we have new board members, they're given those books to guide their work. How am I doing time-wise? So I think I covered it. We have an equity class that is being run in our district. A lot of it's for this is started this year, maybe last year as well. We have equity class going on, and our board members have been encouraged and allowed to take this alongside of our teachers. And that's been very helpful. I'm taking it right now, but we open up for everybody to go to the Vermont School Board Association conference so that they can learn and network. I'm gonna stop there.
Great. Thank you so much. You guys do a lot. It's impressive. And it sounds like your learning is continuous. It's not just a defined period of time where you have a start and finish time for a new board member, that once you get through the new member orientation piece of it, then the member just is seamlessly folded into the continuous learning that the entire board does together as a team. That's great.
Yeah, and every year we get to, during our retreat, we decide what our next year's education, like board education, will be. Just handy.
Right. That's great. Thank you so much, Ursula. I appreciate that. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you later. Kelly and Deborah, they are here representing the Wyndham Southeast School District, and which is part of the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union. And so happy that you both could join us today. So without further ado, I'll let you take it over.
So I'm going to start out, and then Deborah's, I think, will jump in. So I'm going to say, there has not been anything done consistently within the last 4.5 years, but over that time, the need has become very evident. Over the last 2 years as the chair of the board, I have observed some circumstances in which board members could benefit from some professional development and in particular at their fingertips resources. With the goal in mind to create something that would be a manual of sorts, Deborah Stancliffe created the masterpiece we now have, and I will let her go into that.
Thank you, Kelly. My onboarding experience epitomizes both the problem and the solution. Brief history. I moved to Southern Vermont from the Upper West Side of Manhattan in August 2019. Despite the 180 flip from urban to rural, I have retained my identity. Initially, 10 years in the business world, followed by 35 years as a high school educator. In March 22, I was elected to the school board. I was grateful that my learning curve was short because for 8 months I had attended every board meeting before donning my official role as a board member. Onboarding did not exist as a concept at that point. I was never introduced to other board members or to any of the administrators. This lack of process is at best termed unprofessional. There were limited resources available. The essential work of Vermont school boards finally arrived in May. I was told to familiarize myself with Robert's Rules. I attended every webinar and training workshop that the VSBA offered to the extent of ad nauseam repetition. But there is value in repetition to familiarize yourself with what it is you do not know, especially concerning the responsibilities of the superintendent and the responsibilities of a school board. I am grateful to my cohort of board members who supported me in my learning process, but that was not good enough. With the reorganization in March 23, I became a vice chair to Kelly as chair. We immediately worked to identify the needs of the board and to share the workload. Kelly's vision of an orientation procedural manual stems from her own learning curve as a board chair. Her primary goal is to leave the board with a foundation that would enable the next board chair to come out of the gate running. I have taken Kelly's vision and created a manual with contributions from board members. I've watched as Kelly, during a board meeting, goes through this huge manual, and she has her own tabs in it, and she actively uses it. Essentially, I have organized what already exists on numerous sites. This manual represents a compilation of the numerous threads that we must become fully aware of in order to be functioning board members. For now, this thick binder exists as hard copy only. It is filled with key legislative statutes, the role of superintendent, the role of the board, the do's and don'ts of open meeting law, the precision of laws concerning executive session, the language necessary to frame a motion, a point of order, and a growing list of acronyms, as well as agreed upon meeting guidelines. The binder is designed for every board member to understand our multiple responsibilities of oversight of a school district comprised of 4 towns and 10 institutions. During our February retreat, we identified the need for a board calendar distinct from the superintendent's calendar. Our current method of operation is to rush from deadline to deadline in reactive mode. We recognize the need for a calendar that allows us to anticipate what is annualized, and this is a major piece missing from the binder. Our goal is to have a follow-up retreat in April, subsequent to the reorganization, and this will be our first onboarding orientation. The superintendent, of course, will be an integral part of this retreat. I would hope that before April, we would have at least one meeting with new board members, the new leadership team, and the superintendent. Our goal is to listen and to share without violating open meeting law. So what we have put in place as an immediate solution is as follows. Assigning a mentor as the first step, and the second, giving each new member an introductory packet consisting of the orientation manual, Robert's Rules of Order, the 12th edition, and the Governance Core by Campbell and Fullan, the very text that Debbie just referenced. Countering the criticism that too much information is off-putting, as a new board member, I would have appreciated receiving an armful of resources. The goal is that board members are immediately grounded in understanding their role and responsibilities. The next step is engaging a core of board members to edit this manual tab by tab, and ultimately to create an online version. We have a plan. We are learning as we go. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Deborah.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly and Deborah. I took a lot of notes. That was very interesting. I especially like what you said, Deborah, about there's value in repetition, right? I do believe that's true. Sometimes here at VSBA, I feel like I repeat myself a lot, but I have to recognize that as a new board member, hearing it once, hearing it twice, probably not enough, but a third, fourth time that really can reinforce whatever it is that we're trying to teach someone. So it makes sense to me. And I love the idea that you have a manual now and that it's going to be used. Sometimes we spend a lot of time and resources in creating these wonderful documents and these wonderful resources, and then we never use them. So it's very encouraging to know. Look
This
at
is
it. It's great. It's not going to just sit on a shelf and collect dust somewhere. So that's wonderful. Awesome. All right. Our last but not least, our wonderful team from Taconic and Green, Herb Ogden and Dick Dale. I'll hand the floor over to you now.
Thank you. Just a little bit about where we are. Taconic and Green is a 9-town district that includes sort of northeastern Bennington County, southeastern Rutland County, southwestern Windsor County, and northwestern Windham County. We were established in 1917 and began to actually operate in 2018. And I'm very lucky that both the vice chair and the clerk participate in the orientation process. We've all been on the board since it was formed in 2017. So I'm going to hand off very shortly to Dick Dale, who will tell us what he does and what the clerk does, and I'll finish up by explaining how I fill in the gaps once they're done when they orient a new member.
Other people had themselves unmuted. Good morning or afternoon. One of the things that we try to do as a policy governance organization, meaning that we oversee policy, ends policies, which are our broad vision, and also the specific policies that the law requires of us, for example, passing a budget, and leave the operation of the school system to the superintendent. We have monitoring reports, and in policy governance, it's divided up into 5 levels, one of them being definitions. 5 levels of interaction, and specifically outlined by our guru named Carver, but we're way beyond Mr. Carver, that suggests that the superintendent takes the policies, either ends policies, academic, social, economic, our stakeholders, and what we are supposed to do in a broad sense, and we then get monitoring reports, budget reports, all sorts of other policies that are mandated by the state and the federal government. And she, in our case, prepares a report that gives adequate amounts of evidence that she has both interpreted the policy correctly and also interpreted the evidence that she's presented us. We, as board members, are instructed to ask every conceivable nuanced question that we possibly can to understand how our system works, directed by the superintendent. And so the way we begin is to say that we respect every single board member until we've made a particular decision. We say everything is on the table. You, as a board member, must contribute. Not everybody is comfortable contributing, but you need to make your voice heard and your perspective heard. While we debate, Herb is good at acknowledging people's questions, people's opinions, people's ideas. And I look out, and if there's a hand up and Herb hasn't noticed, we do it. We keep going on the debate and discussing the issue until it becomes clearly repetitive, at which point I will whisper in Herb's ear that we're repeating ourselves, and we'll begin to think about cutting off the debate. And Herb has a lovely way of saying, make sure that we're talking about something new to the conversation so that we can reach a decision. I then spend a fair amount of effort welcoming the board member and talking about the respect that we have for each other. We have a list of 6 norms, respect for each other and our opinions being one of them, and another is all of our students are all of our students. We must consider everyone in an equal and unbiased way. We also have other stakeholders. I explained that the stakeholders are the taxpayers. The stakeholders are the parents of the students. The stakeholders are the people who work for our system. Our job is to understand the implications of policies and the actual way the superintendent runs the system so that we can respond to questions. We then talk about conflict of interest and offer examples where we say, as board members, it is not our job to definitively state our opinion. The only place we do that is at board meetings until something has been decided. Once it's decided, we have as a board indicated that the spokesperson is in fact our chair, and every board member will be confronted in the marketplace. We're all parts of towns and people know we're on the board. We don't deal with the operation of the system and recommend for questions related to the operation. I don't like my teacher, or the teacher did this, or the bus broke down, and suggest a methodology that says you start with a classroom teacher, you then move to the principal. After the principal, it gets kicked up, and until your question is answered, you persist as it deals with operations. We are interested in the long-term consequences and strategic orientation of what the school system seeks and hopes to do. I then spend a fair amount of time talking about the fact of we have a consent agenda, getting rid of things like minutes and hiring and all the rest of that. And anybody can challenge the consent agenda, but otherwise it's stuff that the superintendent is in charge of. Approval of minutes, easy. It's consent agenda. It's a 10 to 20 second operation. I explain that because I'm pretty experienced at it, and we three, Herb, myself, and our clerk, collectively gather together to create an agenda. And we tell the new board member, if you've got a thing on the agenda, you must tell one of the 3 of us. And oh, by the way, if you don't think the meeting is proceeding the way it ought to happen, focused on policy, then by all means, talk to one of us. Or even worse, if you're feeling uncomfortable, talk to one of us and we'll try and explain it. And the role of our clerk, who's a very friendly guy, is to point out our role as leaders in the community and to emphasize why we are in the business. All of our students are all of our students, and we want their success. So my role is to explain the operation of the meeting, to understand that if we go to executive session, I form that because it's been set up in our agenda setting procedure so that we are absolutely following Robert's Rules of Order. So we encourage people to believe that they're part of a team and their participation is required, and we respect it. We have student members, we respect them, we respect each other. Herb?
Thank you, Dick. So as you can tell, folks, there's not a lot left over usually for me to do after Dick and the clerk have done their job. Being partly because I guess I'm a retired lawyer, I tend to focus more on rules when I get to my part of it. And I begin by pointing out that this very orientation session is actually required by one of our policy governance policies. Then I ask whether the new member has any questions, although usually Dick or the clerk has already done that. And sometimes there's some questions that make us change our presentation a little bit. I try, with the help of the vice chair and the clerk, to describe the background of the members. We have a 13 elected member plus 2 student representative board. And after a while, it occurred to us that new members don't necessarily have any idea what our backgrounds are. Then I get into materials that are provided by the VSBA. We tell people how to access the essential work of school boards. We point out there are toolkits there, including ones for new members. I ask folks to sign the VSBA Code of Ethics, and I include some interpretations of that we've developed. For example, that the new member has to know that board members can't request information that the public can't unless they relate to some sort of a board function, because that's often one place a new member could go astray totally unintentionally, is to ask the superintendent or some other staff member for information that isn't publicly available and would possibly require quite a lot of work to find out. We emphasize that people cannot make promises to the staff, and that people cannot speak individually for the board unless they've been authorized to. I like to emphasize that people's participation and interaction with the public changes after they join the board. And I use that as a lead in to reminding folks to look at our policies and procedures, which are all on the Supervisory Union website. And then I point out in our policy governance policies, just a few that I think are particularly important for a new member. One is what my own role as chair is in terms of enforcing rules, because if I'm not enforcing the rules, I need to be called on it. That board members aren't allowed to give any direction to staff or anything that looks like direction. Our job, as Dick said, is to emphasize long-term educational benefits, not to try to micromanage, because some new members think that their job is to say what shall be served in the cafeteria. And we spent some time talking about the part of the policy governance, which is what we call a board member code of conduct, which includes supporting the legitimacy and the authority of the board once a decision has been made. We explain that you don't have to say, I think this was the best decision, but what you can't do is undercut it. We talk about conflicts. Usually I give 1 or 2 examples of what might be a conflict and how we've encouraged people to disclose what they think might be a conflict, often reassuring them that if the rest of the board doesn't think there is a conflict, then that ends it right there. We have a somewhat peculiar representational setup where we have 13 members who do not represent the towns from which they're elected. There's a seat reserved for each of the 9 towns, plus another 4 seats from the ones that have the most population. But each one of us is elected at large to represent the whole district. That's a difficult concept, and we have to spend some time on that. I also encourage people to read the merger study report and the articles of agreement that formed the district in the first place, because that sets out some of our goals and some of our limits. I explain that we have 2 student representatives, and by the way, the student representatives get pretty much the same orientation that the elected board members do, except for we don't bother to tell them a lot about executive sessions because they're not allowed in executive sessions. And then, as I think another panelist mentioned, we try to make sure that board members understand what executive sessions are for. And I like to emphasize that the threshold requirement in the statute, which I think some boards may have lost sight of, which is that you can have an executive session only if premature general public knowledge would clearly place the district or the person involved at a substantial disadvantage. And then you go into the list of things that can be discussed in executive session. But I at least like to focus the new members on this idea that, hey, if premature public knowledge is not a problem, then it doesn't make any difference what you're going to be discussing. You haven't met the threshold requirement. And the other thing that we do is encourage, pretty much require board members to use the supervisor union email for all communications with the board. And I explain that a reason for that is if there were a lawsuit or investigation and somebody gets a order to turn over all their correspondence, it's much easier if all your correspondence is on a supervisor union website than if it's on your own personal computer. And then I end the whole thing by, again, asking whether anybody has any questions. But really, what Dick described and what our clerk do are the bulk of what people hear.
We then end the meeting by saying, this is only the beginning. If you ever have questions, if you ever have concerns, the place where you go is to us. And if for some reason you're uncomfortable with us, then you can ask for an executive session in order to express your complaint. We've never had a complaint. We've never had a conflict of interest. And both Herb and David and I spend a lot of time with individual board members who may not have participated in the spirit of our very high functioning board. So we will divide up we think you erred a little bit by proposing to the superintendent or asking the superintendent stuff that policy governance doesn't provide. Superintendent's in charge.
Good point, Dick. And that's led to something useful that happens during board meetings where a member may say, I'm not sure this is proper under point of policy governance, and that will sometimes lead to discussion among the board whether it is appropriate under policy governance.
It becomes a board training for the whole board. Yeah, with that question. That's really clever. I like how you both described the division of labor between the vice chair, between the vice chair and clerk and the chair. I like how you've delineated what those two groups do, which leads me to a question that I had for all of you. And I guess I'll kick off the question and answer part of this webinar now because it's relevant to this. It's my question's about division of labor for all of you. So we understand that one of the characteristics of a strong governance team is this partnership that you spoke about between the superintendent and the board, right? So given this partnership, how do you decide with your superintendent who does what in terms of orienting new board members? Like, do you have a system in place? Maybe it's a written, system, or maybe it's an unwritten, or maybe it's kind of a mutual understanding that the superintendent and his or her staff will do some of this orienting tasks, and then the board will do others. And then maybe VSBA is a third part of this. Like, I'm just curious how you all have tackled that division of labor question, if it's formal, informal, written, verbal understanding. How do you handle that?
Well, I can speak to Taconic and Green. The superintendent really has no role in the orientation. The VSBA does have a role because we refer people to the VSBA materials.
Other districts, does your superintendent play a role in the orientation of new board members?
Well, I'll say for ours, our superintendent is relatively new. So, and with the turnover of board members, by the time that it got to me, it just appeared that there was this kind of void and this the binder and and other resources, other ways of finding information for the different board members, not just the new board members, but also existing board members. Because of course, if they didn't get it before, these resources are helpful for them, even if they've been on the board a year. I'm actually an outgoing board member, so I anticipate Deborah will be taking this ball and rolling with it in the new term. But it's essentially been the board kind of pulling together these resources. But as Deborah said, they're anticipating having something right in the beginning of the new term that is going to bring the superintendent as a part of it. And one of the things that I had envisioned last year that didn't kind of materialize was having the new board members like tour the SU office so they could kind of meet people. We do have a list. Deborah did include in that binder a list of all the people in the SU, so people can know, oh, finance, who do I need to, who would I be expecting to have some sort of an expertise in finance, or the HR director or whatnot. So she did include information about the different departments and who these people are, or if they see a name and they're like, I don't know who that person is, then they can have some idea of that. I think that's the tour didn't materialize last year, but I anticipate that's probably what Deborah has been envisioning for this new orientation in April.
Mhm. Great. Thank you. Ursula, do you want to add anything from Washington Central in terms of the role of the superintendent in your orientation program?
Yeah, I was gonna give Deborah a moment if she wanted
Okay.
to follow up
Yeah,
after Kelly.
I just want to add, I'm impressed with Herb and Dick talking especially about the division of labor in terms of the leadership team. And Kelly and I have a great working relationship where we offload work onto each other. We know who's writing which email to whom. We have a number of critical issues going on in our district that necessitates legal representation. So we are constantly going back and forth. The division of labor that you have just defined is something that takes place during your board meeting. And that I find very interesting, because it means that you have multiple eyes on a given conversation, tracking that rotation of speakers so that the entire board gets to speak before the next person speaks a second time. We haven't worked that out yet. I think we're right on the cusp of doing something like that during the board meeting. Sharing the load is critically important. That's what I wanted to emphasize.
Thank you. That's great.
So I was going to jump in. I am not particularly privy to how our chair and our superintendent organize their workload, and even our vice chair, as just a member of our board. But I know that our superintendent plays a role in some of our education, and the staff from central office and the leadership team will often come in. So like during budget season, we get a full board education on how Vermont funding goes and how budgeting with a school district should go. And that is led by our central office team. And so that's not something that our board chair leads. It's something, and we use the VSBA's education funding video as well. But we have resources that are shared by either central office personnel or our superintendent. But I know, like, I can't remember who mentioned it. If we have questions, they have to go through, like, as board members, if we have questions, we send them through our chair and our superintendent, and then they will get us relative information from the staff, so that we are not approaching the staff on our own, because that's outside of our governance standards.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. Very helpful. Carrie, what do we have going on in the question and answer box?
Oh, we have quite a few questions. Are you ready for them now?
Sure.
All right. To Dick, how do you get all members to participate?
Good question.
Well, remember, they're introverted and extroverted types of people. And the way we do it is at the end of every meeting, we have a form which says how the meeting went according to the way we run things. And did we get off the rails at any particular point? Did everybody have an opportunity to say what they think? We also try not to repeat what someone else has said. Almost all of our votes are 15-0 votes. So part of that is to outline not only the goal of what we're trying to decide, but it's also making sure, and Herb asks this all the time as chair, are we ready to make a decision? And if anybody, we create an ethos and board norm that basically says, if you're not ready to make a decision, make a comment, and the discussion will keep going. So not everybody participates equally, but everybody does participate.
How do you monitor the style of a speaker who makes a point and then reiterates the point and then makes it yet again in an endless loop? How do you tighten that up?
Luckily, we don't have a big problem with that. And the rare times it happens, what I do as chair, and this is regardless of whether it's a new member or a long-time member, is to point out, number one, the time of day when we help to end the meeting, and that it would be nice if comments would be only making additional points rather than repeating old ones. Not usually.
We also, the three of us, in the agenda setting, we'll often take, because we did have a couple of board members that did repeat 7 times the same point, oftentimes repeatedly, and so one of the three of us will have a conversation about trying to make the point and do it with some focus on the time that they're using.
Wonderful. So now I have a statement. One of our board members says, I'm glad there was mention of onboarding student reps to the board. And the next one starts with a question, has a statement, and then I'll read the question once again so it's refreshed. The question is, shouldn't the statutory duties of a board member be a starting point for understanding one's role as a board member? He goes on to say, and since we are all governed by policy, I appreciate the focus on key policies, including the policy on policy formulation. Lastly, a challenge is how to convey governance culture, since culture, by definition, includes tactic, understanding, and best practices of which members may not be easily aware. So the question was, shouldn't the statutory duties of a board member be a starting point for understanding one's role as a board member?
Well, as a retired lawyer, I'll add a few words to that. The statutory duties strike me as being broad enough so that most of the people who've joined the board are interested already in doing some aspect of that. As we are a policy governance board, I actually would rather have the members pay attention to our policies than the broader things that statutes allow us to do.
Anyone else like to comment? We just have a couple more. So the next one says, one aspect of onboarding that may deserve more attention is simply knowing each other as a unique individual with lives outside the board, something teachers should do with their students at the beginning of a class. That's basically a statement. Sounds like it was a great statement, though. The next one says, sounds like some of you do an orientation in a warned meeting and others are just meeting with new board members at a time that is that accurate?
For Taconic and Green, it's one at a time, unless we maybe had two members joining at the same time.
Anyone else?
We've done a mixture of both where our new member orientation, especially if we've had several new members, is at a warned meeting, especially if it's going to be our educational. We talk about what we are allowed to do, what we can't do, what our roles are. And then sometimes it's our chair just reaching out and doing some one-on-one
Since
conversations.
we don't have any committees, unless they are specifically constituted by the board in order to prepare drafts of particular language, we are very sensitive to never replying all to a comment of any single board member. At the same time, since it's Herb, David, myself in the orientation, we do not reach the threshold of a necessarily warned meeting. As a result, we don't warn them.
Anybody else? Okay, I'm not sure that.
We
Go ahead,
have
Kelly.
done we've done a combination of both. We have confirmed with Pietro Lynn, the district's attorney, that what type of training that we can have without having it warned. However, when we had the second board retreat in the end of last month, we actually did warn it just to be cautious, and we also, based on the atmosphere of the current what do I want to say? The current school and community climate, in that questions of transparency by the board, we made sure that we warned it. We made sure that we had public comment on it. And we actually, at the end of that board retreat, we actually came out a little early into public session so that we could have a discussion about the board retreat so that the public, anyone who was there, and it was recorded so that it would be able to be viewed by people later on, so that anyone would then have an idea of what we had done in the training. But we have done the board retreat that we did in last August was not warned, and the board administrative retreat that we had the last June was not warned. We're always careful to check with Pietro Lynn, though.
Wonderful. We have one more question, and that's perfect because we're coming right up on time for the end of the webinar. The question is, what format for public input do these three districts use? Is there an open meeting, or is there an open comment period at the beginning of the meetings and a different time period for items on the agenda? Are there time limits for public comments? And the same person then wrote, my question is related to orientating new board members to the proper format for public input at meetings.
Well, I can handle that for Taconic and Green. I want to thank Rich for asking that question, because it occurs to me that's one thing that we have not been telling people about during orientation, is how our public comment periods work. The law, of course, requires a public comment period. We do two. We set aside 10 minutes at the beginning of a meeting. We set aside 10 minutes at the end of a meeting. And as chair, I try to remember to tell people that I may allow comments on the specific agenda items, but particularly considering what time of evening it is, I don't guarantee it. So there's a guarantee at the beginning, guarantee at the end, possibility during the middle.
Thank you.
Anyone
else?
We don't allow board members to comment unless they are speaking of the board factually. So we don't engage in interaction. More often than not, it has to do with an operation of the school, and Herb turns that answer over to the superintendent.
Perfect.
So we usually give a public comment at the beginning of the meeting, 10 minutes, and it's generally the general timeline is 2 minutes per person, but of course, based on the evening and based on the topics, and sometimes it goes a little bit further. And I generally have been, and this is included in the, Deborah did include this in the binder. I have been reading something that I actually got off on one of the BSBA webinar about a year and a half ago, I think. And essentially it's pre-warning people that they may get a response, they may not get a response. This may be something that is referred to someone in the administration. It might be something that comes up in an executive session. It could, there's this whole list of things, so that people, if we just move on, they've already been kind of like noticed that they may not get an answer at the meeting. And then I wanted to make a quick comment about the timing about the meetings. In the summer, when we had our board retreat, the moderator had suggested putting times on kind of budgeting time for our agendas. And since then I've been doing that. It doesn't always make the meetings go according to how much time we want to spend on each item, but it certainly keeps people mindful of whether we are going over that, and I'm hopeful that it's helpful.
Great.
That's great.
We
So we are-
also, oh,
Go ahead. Go ahead,
I was going
Ursula.
to say, we also provide at the very beginning of the meeting, comment period. We provide one at the end. Our commenters are limited to 1.5 minutes for their comment period. And there are some, like Herb mentioned, we have some topics sometimes during budget presentations, other important conversations that we're having with the public where we're aiming to get input, or we think that they're going to have a lot of questions. We will, in our agenda, have a additional public comment period for specific topics. And the time limit still applies then. And we also do not respond to the comments or questions unless we're in a public forum situation where we're trying to get information and back and forth.
Great.
Yeah, that public comment piece and educating your new board members about how that works and why it works the way it does, I think is so important. And it sounds like you all are including that in your orientation of your new board members. So that's just great. I want to thank you all of you, really, the 5 of you. This was such great information. You gave great advice based on your own experience. And I always learn so much during these webinars from our panelists. And this is definitely no exception. And I'm really anxious to try out some of these things that you mentioned on our board. So thank you very much for being here today and giving us your time so generously. A couple of you referenced what the BSBA does for new board members. And I just wanted to let you know that, yes, we do something called the New Member Academy, and that comes up in May for all newly elected, recently appointed board members. And even those members that were appointed after the last election, they're welcome to come to our academy, and you see the dates and the times there. And basically what this looks like is we base the learning on the Essential Work of Vermont School Boards, the book that every member will receive as soon as they're elected. And we go over those 6 pillars in the book. More information will definitely be coming out about this academy as we get closer to it, but I just wanted to make you aware that the dates and the times are set. So if you want to share that with your newly elected board members, please do so. We'll also make sure that it's in the weekly updates. The other thing I wanted to quickly say before I let you all go is to let you know that our webinar next month in April, can't believe it's April already, soon, is called The Nuts and Bolts of School Construction. And this is just in time for our summer break, when boards will be apprised of, as in some cases, will be asked to approve funds for summer maintenance projects, both big and small. So we thought that April's topic, this would be a good one to have to talk about what that looks like. So we're looking forward to offering that to you all. So that's me. If anybody has any questions, any thing they want to reach out at any time, I'm happy to answer your questions, happy to help you with your own onboarding of your new members. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this process unfolds, especially for Wyndham, who's starting it this year. So that's really exciting. Thank you all very much for attending today. I appreciate it. And please take 2 minutes to do the survey that will pop up on your screen as soon as we log off today. Good night, or good night. I wish it were good night. It's good afternoon. See you all soon. Thank you.